All right.
Well, let's get the right earphone in. All right. Hey, Rob.
Hey.
So I gotta get the right earbuds in. What device am I working on right now?
Exactly.
Can you hear, is this clear if I'm talking now with you?
Yes, that's fine.
Sometimes I don't know if the earbuds are better or worse, but all right. So I see a few people, so I'll bring those folks into the meeting. And I guess, do you want to do like last time where if someone will ask them if they want to raise their hand to participate in the meeting, if they want to be brought into the meeting?
That's great.
Because the
That
council
works.
can bring in this time, obviously, it's their schedule.
Yep.
And we got a work
That's
session, so.
All right, so I'm gonna step away for a minute. I'll be back.
Okay. Hey, good morning, folks. If anyone is on the attendee side and they were planning to participate in the meeting, if you raise your hand, we can make sure that we bring you in. That way you'll be able to speak. And to raise your hand, next to your name, there should be a little icon that says raise hand, to raise your hand, you just click it.
The weirdest thing to see yourself walking into a room that you're not in.
Yeah. Oh, you got that email I forwarded you, Rob, on the placard?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so we can
Yeah.
talk about that later. And Joy was going to try to join in either today or tomorrow or both.
Okay.
So.
I don't know how to feel about this.
What's that?
It's reporting that Disney's profits sink 91%. Not revenues, but their profits.
Well,
They're still making money.
that's a good thing, right?
Yes, it is. I just don't know whether the reporter was reporting the right thing though.
Right.
Good morning.
Hey, David, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Fabulous. And you?
Good, good. It's Wednesday, halfway through the week, I guess.
What day is it? Come on, Phil. What day is it?
It is Wednesday. Come on now.
It's hump day.
All right.
All right, we have reached the appointed hour. We're going to have some folks straggling in, I'm sure, but we might as well get going. We've got a lot to cover. Thanks folks, for getting on this call, talking about things we can be doing to sort of help get ready for the reopening of restaurants in Rhode Island over the next several weeks. Just a general overview of where the governor is as of yesterday. The governor has indicated that the state of Rhode Island will likely begin allowing restaurants to serve on premises outdoors in phase one, but not on day one of phase one. We anticipate that day one of phase one will be the 9th of May. So we're not looking at restaurant on premises service on the 9th of May. We're probably looking at it a week after that. So the real question becomes, how do we get ourselves ready to be prepared to do on-premises outdoor service the week after the 9th? So the week of, what would that be, guys? I'm not looking at a calendar here, but the week of really
The 11th.
the 18th. No, the week
18th.
after the 9th plus a week. So
Okay.
probably the 18th. Is probably the day that we're somewhere in that neighborhood. The 18th-ish is where we're going to start seeing on-premises outdoor only. Indoor service is going to be a phase two activity. Outdoor services, the governor has described it will be tables set an appropriate social distancing distance from each other with access to the indoors only for the purpose of taking food out, and possibly, this is still an open question, restrooms indoors. So we're still sort of figuring out what that's going to look like, but we're looking at some sort of outdoor service, probably starting the week of the 18th. A number of communities are wrestling with how to make sure that we are authorizing outdoor service as quickly as possible. One model is to simply say outdoor service is allowed, and you know, we're going to correct things as deficiencies are identified by the public. Here in South Kingstown, the model that we've been working with is a little bit different. I'm going to share with folks a memorandum that sort of outlines what we're thinking here in South Kingstown. Share. We've put together a review of all of the problems that typically would show up if we were going to allow for outdoor service. We've identified alcohol in the zoning requirements for extended service area as the two big ones. This is the wrong memo, sorry guys. This is the right memo. And we think we can get down to a 3-day approval if we are moving to just an administrative approval of the base plan for outdoor service. The alcohol piece is relatively easy. We've spoken to the state, and the state allows for temporary expansion of alcohol licenses as a regular seasonal thing. So we can operate at least through the summer on that state authority. We need to then just approve the change in the service area, and that we think can be done administratively. We'll be going to the council on Monday night for their view and permission to continue to proceed in this way. But what we're anticipating is a general, very broad overview of plans for expanding outdoor service. The administrative review will focus entirely on life safety issues and some parking assessment, but it's life safety. We're worried about making sure that pedestrians aren't crossing, and we're worried about making sure that if there's any construction involved, it complies with the fire code and the building code. That's it. You know, so long as you're coming to the town with a plan that says this is where we want to do the service, we can review it and determine that there's no pedestrian car conflicts and there's no life safety issues, no building code issues, et cetera, we should be in relatively good shape. Speaking to the fire marshal yesterday, there are tent permits that would be required. The UFD has a Union Fire District to expedite the applications for tent permits and to look into, we haven't gotten a commitment from UFD, but they're also contemplating waiving the fees associated with those reviews. Part of our proposal to the town council on Monday night will be to waive the zoning and building permit fees associated with expanding to the outdoors. We know everybody's hurting and we're not going to be looking for fees unnecessarily. So I guess that's sort of a quick summary of where we are. I'm going to stop sharing this memo. The key points here are that we're going to be proposing to the council that we set up a COVID-19 emergency temporary uses permit. That permit will be loaded into, in fact, our IT department loaded that permit into our online system yesterday. As soon as we're approved by the council to go ahead with the plan that we're proposing, that permit will be available to the public via the View Permit online system. You can make your application entirely online. It will be reviewed by zoning and building just to make sure that there's no life safety issues there. And it'll be viewed by the fire marshal to make sure that there's no fire safety issues there. And it will be approved so long as we don't see life safety problems. View permit issues will be automatically, view permit issues an automated permit once the individual approvals are in place. That is the life safety and just general review. And that's really about it on the on-premises service. Now, one of the things that we've talked about here before, and we've continued to sort of run to ground, is whether we can do something about opening public spaces to restaurants. I'm going to share another document outlining sort of where that's evolving to. We've had a number of conversations with the Recreation Commission. I know Representative Tanzi has spoken to DEM about the possibility of using state-owned parks and beaches, and I'll let her report out on that. But I want to share with the group what we spoke to the Recreation Commission about on Monday evening. The Recreation Commission was approached with this idea that we're going to make public resources or public spaces available. Those public spaces include public parks, perhaps parking lots such as the parking lot behind the Bell Block, and possibly public right-of-ways. Some portion of the parking spaces on Main Street. I know that there's an outstanding question with the Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation, to determine whether that's a possibility. There are some places such as Chapel Street up in Kingston, adjacent to the Kingston Emporium, that may be appropriate for closure so that there's a place for retailers and restaurants to move into. If there are other locations that would be appropriate for closure, we're willing to talk to folks about that. Parks, obviously, we have lots of green space in South Kingstown, and when part of the problem that we're facing is figuring out how to find the space to put customers, we have to have greater distance between them, moving into those green spaces seems to make sense. We'd like to talk to local businesses about their view of how best to make use of our public spaces. One thing that I want to point out is we can use public spaces not only for restaurants potentially, but also for retail uses. This is an example of very small buildings, sheds really, that are used by merchants for retail operations outside of a normal shop. This is kind of a nice model because you can put a lot of distance between buildings. The merchants can bring their wares to one location, have somebody man the hut, the shed, the little building for the day, close it up, lock it up, and be sure that things are secured for the day. So we're exploring this idea with the retailers as well. And it could well be that we end up with a mix of retail and restaurant uses in some of these public spaces. So we need to be thinking about that. I'm not going to talk about the placard program at this point. I do want to talk about the models that we talked to the Recreation Commission about the other night for use of the public parks. The first concept that we worked with was this delivery to table concept. The idea was that we were going to put picnic tables or tables at the public parks, assign them an address, and then allow people to have Grubhub or Takeout Taxi or other delivery services bring food to that address. It's a nice model in that it would be available to all restaurants. Any restaurant that's got a delivery service or a partnership with a delivery service could serve to that table. There are lots of challenges with that model. We're still open to people telling us that they think this is the way to go. But we also talked to the Rec Commission about an exclusive lease to the extent that we've got restaurants or very few restaurants that are capable of providing full service at a park. That's certainly something that we're willing to talk to restaurants about. So if we've got a restaurant that's willing to commit to a catering style service at that location for the entire summer, we're happy to talk to folks about that. It's not as equitable. There's that disadvantage to it. This may not be the best way to go, but we are not taking it off the table at this point. And then finally, the model that the Rec Commission preferred is a semi-permanent event style setup. They're talking about town-owned or town-leased tables, town-owned or town-leased tents, and a rigid demarcation fence, sort of walling off the area where service is being provided. A caterer event equipment would be installed on the premises. It could be one restaurant, it could be multiple restaurants, but the idea is that this becomes sort of the new use of the park for the course of the summer. The Rec Commission's preference here was based on the idea that stability in the service would be desirable. It would also allow for better control of alcohol if alcohol were to be served by these restaurants in this location. One of the concerns that the Rec Commission had is not allowing BYOB because they don't want to set precedent that would be difficult to revoke after this temporary use. So the idea was if we can sort of make this permanent, we can assign responsibility for use of the premises to a restaurant or a set of restaurants, a group of restaurants, we can control it better. And when the licensee is no longer on site, we're back to our default rule, which is no alcohol in town parks. And that's all I've got. I'm gonna shut up now and listen to folks who've been thinking about this more than I have.
Rob, I do see some folks on the attendee side. So if there was anyone that's called in that does want to speak, you can raise your hand. Either click the icon next to your name to raise your hand, or *9 if you're on a phone, and then *6 will unmute you.
And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Kayla or Terry if I've missed anything from the planning side or from the recreation parks side.
I'll jump in first if that's okay. So I don't think so. I will acknowledge I was a couple of minutes late to the call, getting off another one. But I'll say that when it comes to the on-site piece, that's been sort of where I've been focused. There are a couple. I'm not sure if we'd mentioned there are probably some parameters that we're gonna sort of hold everyone to generally, right? Because we're not vetting this through in the way that you would if you were, permanently expanding seating or you're expanding your areas. There's some sort of norms we just need to probably all operate within so that we don't have issues with neighbors and things like that come up. So I think there's likely that you'd see that there's sort of a curfew on outdoor service that's established kind of globally for everyone, a certain hour of the night where we say you'll be packing up your outdoor service by this time so that, we have a little bit of control about when that's happening. and a couple of other little pieces like that, that would be sort of standard things that when you do that view permit process, you'd see just a few basic rules about how we're going to sort of all make this happen. So an acknowledgement that it'll be temporary, but just some, some restrictions likely on outdoor music being played and things like that, so that we can keep it controlled enough that when we're working through things in a different format, we're not causing undue burden on the neighbors to provide some benefit here to the restaurants and businesses that are struggling. So I think that's probably all I'd add. I think likely everybody on the call would find them to be reasonable. You're not going to find us to be unreasonable in setting them, but we just need a little bit of bounds to make sure we know what it is to be a good neighbor.
Yeah, and just
And this is
following on that,
Terry.
I'm sorry, Terry, I'm just going to jump in because I think Kayla makes a good point, and I just want to make sure we're clear on this other aspect. What we're talking about is temporary relief from the zoning requirements. We're not talking about a way to get a permanent change to a building or to the service area. We will require that when the state of emergency or the temporary relief deadline has passed, whatever improvements have been put in place are removed. So we may have, someone who wants to do rooftop service. If there's a railing system that has to be installed on the roof, it's going to have to come off after the emergency order is lifted or the deadline for removal has passed. If there are, tables that are allowed in a parking lot, they're going to have to be removed after the emergency has passed. This is temporary relief. This is not going to be a way to sort of avoid the permanent zoning regulations. I'm sorry, Terry.
Oh, no, thanks, Rob. Yeah, just to piggyback on what Kayla said, I think, first of all, you hit on the points that were discussed at the rec commission meeting. Some of the things that came up afterwards, more with staff, were similar things to what Kayla had pointed out. Curfew in terms of how late seating would go, lighting in parks because there's not that infrastructure already in place, music, that type of thing. I think those are points that would need to be discussed, but not unmanageable at all. So I think, but otherwise you hit on the points from the discussion at the rec commission meeting.
Hi, Rob, can you, there's been some discussion on the total limit of peoples and gatherings for the state of Rhode Island through the summer. Is that at 50? Has the governor stated that that's going to stay at 50? And does that apply then to an individual restaurant? So that the max number of customers that we could be looking at for the whole summer is 50?
Right. So it's a complicated question. The answer is not perfectly clear. Everything is fluid. The governor's office, freely admits that everything is subject to change. But at this point, gatherings of 50 looks like it's going to be the summer rule. Now, whether that applies to a particular place. What a particular place is still up to, definition. It is possible, I can imagine. Now, I'm not making an assertion here, but I want to sort of show us where the light may be so that we can move toward it. It's possible that 2 service areas by a single restaurant total more than 50 and we don't have a problem. But that's going to be by design. It's going to have to be designed so that there's a safe distance. If it looks reasonable, if it's safe, if it's, the appropriate distance between each customer or each customer grouping, then, we're going to be okay. The trick here is to make sure that we are practicing COVID safe practices, that we've got masks on the servers, that we've got, the appropriate distance between customers, that we've got a bathroom protocol that doesn't have people stacking up in the men's room or the ladies' room. Those are the things that we're going to be looking to. The absolute number, 50, is a benchmark that makes sense because, it just gives us a clear demarcation line. But all of these demarcation lines are subject to work. We can figure out how to work with them. Working within them may be a matter of dividing it into 2 service areas, inside and outside, for example. So, in the Muses case, if you had 20 people in the building and you had 30 people outside, or 35 people outside, we're not going to say you've got 55 people and you got to be shut down or you got to throw 5 people off the premises. We're going to figure this out.
But we should, at least for starting, that the outside service should be no more than 50 for starting.
Any one service area should not be more than 50. Any one service area. How we define that, I think you're perfectly safe, Dave, starting with 50 in the parking lot as you've designed or as you've conceived it is right. So if I can turn to Representative Tansey. I'm sorry. I know Representative Tansey's been in contact with a number of state agencies on some of the state's property and possibility of working with state facilities.
Sure. And just, when the governor, just to address the point that Dave brought up, the governor had said something about reaching 100 by August. So I think as she continues on, you know, she gave the example of a wedding. If you have a wedding planned before August, that's over 100, you know, consider it canceled. So I think, you know, the numbers will continue to increase, assuming that people are continuing to follow the guidelines. But to get to what we talked about on the last Zoom with regard to using the parking spaces on the state-owned roads, I put the question to them if we can use that space to expand seating capacity for restaurants or retail space for retailers. And they have recommended, I'm going to put in a request. I would love it if the council would approve and join onto the request, but to allow us the ability to use those parking spaces. We're going to have to put some tight parameters on it. It'll have to have, you know, similar to what Kayla was saying. You know, it's going to have time limits. And we're going to have to show them that we have a safety program, you know, including maybe Jersey barriers, you know, something to prevent pedestrians or restaurant goers or shoppers from being hit. You know, there's currently that the curbing that protects people on the sidewalks. We need to find a means to show that if we are granted permission, that we can give the appropriate protection. So I've asked them for a rough timeline, an optimistic timeline, and a pessimistic timeline as to when they could give us the approval. I'm waiting for them to get back to me on that one. So, you know, they haven't said no, but, you know, we're going to have to come up with some guidelines on that. I next approached DEM, asking them if we can have local restaurants deliver to patrons at the beaches. You know, in years past, the concessions have closed around 5 o'clock, and we had talked about, you know, the parking lots are open after 4 p.m., so the deliveries would have been able to go in and out at their leisure. The problem this year is twofold for allowing that to happen. One, they do have a new parking contract, and, you know, they're still working out the bugs on that, so any extra allowances they're afraid is going to be a little difficult to control. But most importantly, the biggest limitation is the fact that the contract that they have signed with the concession folks allows them this year, for the very first year, to go as late as they want. So they're allowed to be there until sundown. You know, they noticed that the folks last year, it was their first year as the concessionaires. They noticed that people were still there as they were packing up to go, and saw that they were leaving money on the table. And so DEM has extended their contract to allow them to go until the end. So as of now, the town beaches, or excuse me, the state beaches will be the same policy. People can deliver, you know, to the gate, have their patron meet them at the gate to do the delivery, but they wouldn't be allowed on the premises. The second question that I asked DEM was, would we be allowed to do deliveries inside parks and campgrounds? Campgrounds this year, they have a new policy with COVID. They're not allowing any guests. So delivery people would not be allowed inside the campgrounds. And, you know, the obvious campgrounds around here would be Burlingame, which is a tremendous, you know, they have a lot of campers that go there in the hundreds. And then also Fisherman's Memorial, which is another local, and, you know, it's booked year for the entire season. So what's happening with that is they are going to consider, if this is something that interests you all, the possibility of doing, what they were calling food trucks, but you're all restaurants, you're not food trucks, and to invest in a food truck would be a tremendous thing that you're probably not interested in doing. So, we're just kind of brainstorming, trying to come up with different ideas. And, one would be a food cart, a much smaller investment, somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000 probably. But being able to set up a tent, have a food cart there, and being able to sell. It would be a per diem of $25 a day, and you would sign up, on a website, and be able to reserve your spot in the different campgrounds across the state. The second thing that, seems an option is to have a catering tent. So, you would bring your own kind of refrigeration. The problem is you'd have to have your own generator. They don't have any infrastructure at the campgrounds to support you. So you would be a full-on independent catering service. You could bring your grill, you could bring your, whatever it is that you need, and be able to sell. It would be for the entire day. You'd have the ability to be there. You wouldn't be required to be there from, morning until evening. You could just choose to go for the evening if that's what you were interested in. But then the second thing that they talked about was allowing folks to pre-order. So when, people checked in, they would have a menu of, that they could hand out that you all would be providing them. And then you could do the delivery to the gate. Or they even talked about having something called like a restaurant night where each of you could reserve the spot and just have like a to-go table set up, for an hour or two at night. You'd essentially have all the orders pre-ordered and then just drive them there, and you'd be, delivering people their little individual cartons or containers that they pre-ordered. So, I'm not a restaurant owner, but, it does seem like that kind of, I'm going to call it the food truck model, even though it's not really a food truck, might be good. The only thing that you would need were your food safety manager license and the insurance to show that, you have the person who is on site is food safety certified, and that you have the insurance to do it. And then of course, your restaurant license. So she's sending me, Cindy Elder is going to send me, kind of these guidelines. As soon as I get them, I'll forward them out to everyone. If this is something that you all are interested in, we can have a smaller working group to go ahead and organize it.
Great. Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah, one last thing. It's not just, because I know that this year is going to be a struggle for people. I mentioned those 2 campgrounds, but there are campgrounds throughout the state. And if this program is going to begin, it's going to be open. Why interesting to go to Colt State Park and set up, the food truck model. It may be something that can help you get through this period. And again, it's a short-term, potential fix to a serious problem that you guys are all experiencing.
Great. Again, thank
Can
you.
I ask a question?
Yes.
Robert, so I have a concern about food trucks. What is our policy on food trucks, especially out-of-town food trucks coming into South Kingstown? Because when you consider the investment that the brick and mortar people have in their facilities, it could be somewhat unfair, I think, but I don't know how the other restaurant owners feel about it.
Right. So this is Rob Zarnetsky. The state preempted much of the regulation of food trucks last year. I'm going to let who we got, Kayla or Susan, who wants to explain the current state of state law with regard to food trucks.
Give it a first whack, Susan, or Susan, if you want to. You're welcome. I've already spoken, so you're welcome to if you want to. You correct me if I'm wrong though, because I'm best when I'm looking at the rules and I'm not looking at them right now. But largely, I think our situation with food trucks in town is that food trucks there's no prohibition against out of town food trucks. I'm going to speak to your question, Rob, sort of directly. we don't have a prohibition against out-of-town food trucks. You don't have to be a South Kingstown license. You just need to get a food truck, and the actual title of the license is a mobile food establishment license from the town council, but there's not like a residency or a business primary location requirement to be in town. You just need to get a mobile food establishment license, and then an out-of-town food truck would be looked at the same as an in-town food truck.
Right. So just to be clear on it, the license for mobile food establishments is actually a state license with a local add-on that really is more in the form of a registration, so we know who's in town. It's not really that we can exclude. We cannot have conditions above what the state has for the state license.
Do we have any idea how many of those licenses are out there now?
Susan, do you know?
We don't have very many that I'm thinking of. They are administratively approved, so you're not going to see them going before the council. But if they have their state food truck license, we are pretty much basically required to issue them a local food truck permit.
And I think the number last time I checked was 5. I think we had 5 of these.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
No. That doesn't mean that in a summer where competition is going to be different, that we don't see a bunch coming in. That's quite possible.
One other question on the timing of, and I know it's probably a guess, but through the phases, if we meet the criteria in phase 1, do we know when inside seating for 50 might open up?
We don't. Those plans by the state still are in development.
Okay.
So one of the things that I'd like to get some feedback on is this idea, particularly around downtown Wakefield, of whether we'd rather be in green space, Saugatucket Park, the parking lot, the town parking lot, or on Main Street in the right of way where the parking spaces are. What works best, do we think, for local restaurants and retailers for that matter? Where's the best space for us to move into downtown? Or what seems like it might be the best bet? Kenny?
Yeah, I'm thinking. So when you say parking lot, you don't mean our parking lots. You mean the green space the town's going to do. So when I'm confused where you mean by parking.
So I mean the municipal parking lot behind Main Street. I mean the
Okay, so like
parking lots
beyond the Bell Block.
behind the Bell Block, on the other side, adjacent to or behind the Comfort Station. Those are the 2 town parking lots, and the green space adjacent to it. I mean, I understand that we have a swale in the one, which is going to make it hard to do anything, but setting tables up along the walkway, that kind of thing. And then going to the other side of the river as well. You've got the sanctuary and you've got the green space that is the park on the other side as well. So it's a tougher space to get to. I mean, delivery service, delivering food across the bridge is kind of a pain in the neck, but
Right.
thoughts on if we were going to try to find space in downtown Wakefield to expand into, what works? And heck, if there's private space that we ought to be expanding into, we should find out who owns it and ask them.
So when you say the green space behind the Bell Block, do you mean shutting down parking spaces and taking up the parking lot, or do you mean just the grass along the river and the walkway?
Could do both or either one, either. I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, when you take up parking spaces, you've got to put the vehicles somewhere. Part of the challenge is not knowing what the COVID restrictions are going to do to consumers' attitudes, whether people are going to be coming out at all, or whether we're dealing with reduced numbers because of the restrictions on the number of patrons at each restaurant, et cetera. But it seems somewhat reasonable to believe that we're going to have reduced demand to some extent, reduced parking demand to some extent. So some parking spaces are probably going to be surplus. But that having been said, even if that's not the case, even if we've got a situation where we know we're going to be able to fill up the parking lot, we may prefer to fill it up with people rather than cars and push the vehicles somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I know when we throw our events, we take up the parking spaces and it's not that big of a deal. I'd probably circle back. I'd probably go walk the area, take
Yeah.
a look at it one more time, and then, you know, if I could meet with you, talk to you, that'd be the best. And I'll talk to a couple of the other businesses as well. Try to get a combined effort. I didn't see another Main Street restaurant on there besides the Muse, but they're a little further down. So.
Yeah. And we were contacted by one other restaurant owner on Main Street, so we'll be talking to him as well.
Yeah. So when you say the Saugatucket Park area, do you mean down like the whole memorial area, like the Memorial Park?
So we'd have to stay respectfully away from the memorial. I'm not going to have folks, eating sandwiches on a war memorial or up on the school, but there's still a pretty big green area in Saugatucket Park on both sides of the river. Remember the Saugatucket Park has the walkway on the Wakefield side of the river as well, the downtown side of the river as well.
Yeah. So a little bit of that field kind of floods when it rains too.
Yep.
A little bit.
Yes. So
again,
yeah, I don't know.
The question there is just a question of geography. You know, is it too far to walk with a hot meal across the bridge? Another element is just operational. Does it make sense for us to put a tent or tents up in Saugatucket Park for the entire summer for you to haul, or for restaurants to haul the catering and warming equipment that you're going to need to make an all-day operation work in a park? And is there some way to do it that creates the space you need for customers and the opportunity for service that is very different? I mean, if we were to put tents up permanently for the summer, that's completely different operations than what you guys have done historically, but it might work. My point is, we need folks to think through and start letting us know how they'd like to proceed. We're offering, and again, this is still theoretical until I get approvals from the council, we're suggesting that there's public space available. You guys are going to be space constrained, and we know that the town has space. So there ought to be part of a solution in that.
And then there's on High Street as well, the restaurants that are on High Street. So the Flats and the one that's by Pier Cleaners that can make use of that space. And I envision more of like an electric bicycle. If you guys got an electric bicycle, package things up, you could, send your person on their bicycle down to, down to wherever the person who ordered the food is seated. So, I don't picture a waitress running with a hot plate, but.
Would there be any merit to closing down Main Street between Brickley's and the World War II Museum and making that a retail and even food trucks, or just bringing more people into the area? Or is that something we want to stay away from, is bringing too many people into an area?
We do have to watch the number of people. So the trick here on some level is trying to create a festive feel without creating a festival that has people on top of each other. So it is a bit of a balancing act. And the reason you'd close down a Main Street is so that you've got enough room to accommodate people with enough space between them. So I'm not averse to the idea of talking about rights of way. I think that Chapel Street up in Kingston is a natural. I think that Main Street is going to be tough because it's a state highway. Perhaps Robinson, but you don't want to make any determinations of that sort without talking to everybody involved, everybody who has a storefront, everybody who uses that road for access to their property. So those are conversations worth having. I think they're going to be tough because the balancing of all of the interests and all of the rights is going to be hard. So the idea of doing, I don't know if folks have ever been to Halifax, but what they do in Halifax is they take parking off the road and they build essentially little decks that are the width of a car that they put into the spaces that are typically in the fall and spring used for parking vehicles, and in the winter used for parking snow. But they build little decks so that you're elevated a little bit off the road. The vehicles can see you. You're above the curb, and that works. I mean, it's a very visually clear indication that this is not a place to drive. So that might work. And as Teresa reported, the state is considering whether or not that's an option. If that's the preferred option for folks on Main Street, we ought to know that so that we push harder and sort of insist upon it. If parking or if space in the back is preferable, then we don't necessarily have to push at DOT as much.
And there's also Kingstown Road in Peacedale that we can, consider. It's another state road that we can consider.
Rob, I just wanted to mention, I think it's a good idea if we took the parking away on the street and let everybody walk in the parking spaces and let the restaurants put tables in front of on the sidewalk. I mean, I think that's the most logical beginning to all of this, to show that you're open, you're serving, plus you're close to your business, especially for breakfast and lunch people. Nice days, but I think that's something we really should consider in certain areas. And then they can park in the municipal lot, and then if it grows, you consider something bigger than that.
Right. So what DOT is saying is that you've got to have some way to make sure that there's not pedestrian vehicle conflicts.
Right.
So walking in the road, they're in jeopardy of being hit. So we've got to figure out how to get them in, in theory, you could just put sawhorses up.
Right.
The vehicles have to go around them. Sawhorses is probably.
You've seen Narragansett. They've already done that, although they're just trying to keep the cars out completely, but.
Right. So
I
got to figure that piece out if that's a preferred solution.
Can I jump in for a second here? This is a topic that I'm very, very, very interested in. I think that the idea of I'm really going to steal from some other people, and then I actually want to show an image because I think it's interesting and I want to sort of spur thoughts in people. But I think we're right that the use of parking spaces particularly in a state right of way is going to be an easier push than rerouting traffic on a numbered state road. And I think that there are standards we can pull from. There is a national movement called Parking Day. It doesn't relate to anything we're doing here, but it's a time when people use parking spaces to do art installations and other sort of uses of space. And there's a set of guidelines for how they separate vehicles from those areas that used to be parking spaces, but are used differently to avoid those conflicts. And they're sort of tried and true practices of you need something that's continuous and what it needs to be that separates. And so there's some things we can pull together there to flush out what that picture is of creating a safe separation. But to that end, I actually, if I can screen share for a second, Rob, if you'd be okay with it, I want to show you guys an image of something that is more robust than that, but is sort of the concept that I think is interesting for you guys to think about what it might mean for you, particularly restaurants in Peacedale, in Wakefield, maybe even Matunic, who have on-street parking potentially in front of them, what it is to use those spaces. So I'm going to show you guys an image from Montpelier, Vermont, which is actually pretty interesting. Let's see if I can actually do that or not.
And Kayla, that was the impetus in my mind for this, was exactly the parking day.
Yeah, like it seems like an interesting piece. Okay, so if you guys are seeing this, this is something that they did in Montpelier, Vermont, in their downtown, right? So you're seeing across the street, their ice cream, Chill, actually, you'll see here is an ice cream shop. But they took this, and this actually was a parking day event they did once, but they liked so much they've now kept and made a sort of a permanent seasonal fixture in downtown, and it's growing in Montpelier. And this is a similar downtown scenario to Wakefield, but the use of a parking space to create something like this right in front of your restaurant is going to be our easier solution, likely, than closing down a state right-of-way, and a way that we can pull from previous practices to show that we know we can do this safely and we're not starting from scratch here. So I'm gonna take this image down, but That's kind of an idea.
And
That's
Newport
exactly,
has done that as well. Newport
Yeah.
did that just off of Broadway or just off of Bellevue.
Yeah,
And
it
this is-
seems to work well for people, and it's something that we have the bones, to sound like a planner here, we have the bones to do it. You know, we have, particularly in our villages, we have businesses right up against those rights of ways, and we have parking spaces on street in front of them.
yeah, this is the Nova Scotia model that I had in mind as well. Exactly what they do. It works. Apparently in 3 different places. Other thoughts? So I will point out that this meeting has actually, this is the first of our sort of outreach meetings, administrative outreach meetings that we have posted as a town council meeting so that the town council can participate. The subject of the meeting is restaurants and reopening. But at this point, since we've got not only a majority, but we've got all of the council on this call, I'd like to hand it over to Abel Collins and see if Mr. Collins has any suggestions or ideas or would like to take this meeting in a direction that we have not.
No, I really just was attending to get other people's input largely. One question that does occur to me is what's happening with our theater licenses. I know, Contemporary Theater Company has an outdoor space where they could potentially host events, and that could, theoretically, I think, work in tandem with a restaurant business. Maybe a little less so with the courthouse, and then the pump house here has like an outdoor space. So I don't know if what we're considering doing with those licenses.
So we have not reached out specifically to the theaters for theater and park or a theater and park concept, but we've talked about it among ourselves. We did talk to Chris Simpson recently. Didn't come up in that conversation, but I think that there's something that we can do with those theater licensees and our public spaces. Maybe Old Mountain Field, maybe some of the other park spaces that aren't being contemplated for retail and restaurant use. Aside from that, expanding over into Saugatucket for the Contemporary Theater makes some sense. If that's not where the restaurants want to be, then it may be a place where theater could happen. Yeah, we just need to talk to folks and see how they want to operate.
Rob, if I may, this is Terry. We do have that venue at Marina Park where there is a stage area. Again, that's a nice space. And if we're looking at dining there, I'm not sure we have room to do both, but the stage at the far end of the park is available. Something to consider.
Caleb.
I know someone was going to ask about, talk to the land trust. Did anybody?
Yeah, I spoke to Land Trust about their field next to Matunic Beach and the Matunic Town Beach. And I thought they own that field. They don't. Someone else does, and I'm not sure who. There is, however, a significant field there. It looks like there's some kind of septic system under the ground, but it's not really noticeable. It's a nice large grassy area. If we were going to do that picnic table model where we deliver that, it seems like there's a decent area that isn't used for parking, might be usable just to the north of the main parking lot there. But I actually have a couple questions aside from that, if I can throw them out there. In regard to the timeline for the permitting process, obviously, if we are going to go through with anything, we're going to need to know if we're going to get permitted for what we're going to get permitted for, and then it's going to take us some time and resources to put it together. What does that timeline look like? When I understand there's going to be an online permit process. When will that be available? And when is it possible, do you feel, we will be able to get a permit to do what we propose to do or get a decision on that permit. This way we know how to plan.
Right. So this is Rob Zarnetsky. So we have built the online permit module. It's ready to go. We need to talk to the council on Monday night where they can have a full discussion about the pros and cons of pursuing a sort of fast track administrative approval of temporary use permits. But assuming for the moment that the council doesn't find fault with the idea of moving things on a fast track, I anticipate that we will be ready to issue permits for light construction and improvement to parking lots and other minor improvements to facilities next week.
And so those applications will be available online, or are they available now? Or
They will be available online as soon as the council tells us they should be.
okay, so that'll likely be at that earliest Monday.
The earliest it could happen is Monday.
Okay.
And if it happens Monday night, then the electronic permit will in all likelihood be available Tuesday morning.
Another question I have is regarding the temporary nature of the permit. Will it be temporary for the summer or temporary as long as this reduced capacity restriction is enforced?
So I'm actually contemplating asking the council to give us a date certain for the temporary constructions, whatever might get built. If you're bringing in, I don't know, Jersey barriers to serve as barriers between pedestrians and cars, those can be in place until, and it'll be a date certain, whether it's October 1st or, October 15th is going to be the subject of some discussion on Monday night, I'm sure. But I do recognize that for some of the improvements that businesses will be making, we're talking about substantial financial investments. And I'd rather not have us tie it to an order that might be lifted on August 15th and then have everybody have to tear everything down on August 15th. I mean, I think that, to the extent that we can build some certainty into the investment that businesses are going to be making, we're going to be doing the right thing.
Could it be worded until I don't think anybody thinks that in August we're going to be at a regular capacity. Can it be until that we're allowed to be at a regular capacity, but no earlier than October 15th or whatever date you propose?
I think that makes sense. I think that there are two conditions that you want to have. You want to have a condition that is an absolute end of the temporary use, and that's probably going to be the end of the season. So, whatever the end of the summer fall season is, again, whether that's October 1st or some other date, but whatever the end of the season is, or whenever the restriction on occupancy goes away. And then it's, whichever is last, whichever is longer. I think that's going to end up being what you're looking at, Perry.
Awesome. And the last question I have, and then I'll shut up. You mentioned last time something about a 60, or I forgot a conversation I had at some point with 60 square feet per person. Is that, if you can talk more about that.
Sure. So this is actually one of the few numbers we've actually heard out of the state with regard to the distance around people. And I'm gonna turn this over to Terry because it's actually a number associated with the beach discussion, not restaurants. But we have heard a number around restaurants. The reason I point to it is because I actually think it's a pretty good indication of the type of space we're going to be looking for, that the state is going to tell us got to be looking for, and that is just going to end up being the safe practice. Terry, so you can explain the conversation around the 60 square feet. Oh, you're muted, Terry.
Sorry about that. This is Terry. So actually the discussion and the idea of calculating for a safe beach operation, assuming that this Reopen Rhode Island phase-in plan stays on track, was based on a formula of a 50 square foot area per person if we were to grid out the beach and come up with a number that we feel would be safe for beach patrons if they are not part of a certain group, that they're separated by at least a perimeter of 50 square feet. That was a discussion among the coastal neighboring towns, Narragansett, Charlestown, Jamestown, Newport, and South Kingstown, based on some preliminary discussion with DEM. DEM has not conveyed a specific number that I am aware of at this time, although there is another conference call this week, tomorrow, with DEM that will likely shed a little more light on it. But that's the number, that's the figure that we are using for recommending the town beach policy going into Memorial Day weekend.
And again, it's only a thing. It's only the one measure that folks have sort of honed in on. The other would be 6 feet by 6 feet. So I've got Councilwoman Kelso, who's patiently had her hand up. Councilwoman Kelso.
Good morning, everyone. So I did not read into the governor's comments the 50-person gathering maximum as that would be applied to restaurant business. I took that as to be an event that you would be having, but I think we need to wait for further clarification, first of all, from her. But if you have an enormous parking lot, 50 people may be half of it at 6 feet or 10 feet or whatever you've got the table spaced out. I wouldn't base our plans right now on that 50-person minimum as far as restaurants go. I really believe that's an event, which is different than a restaurant environment. So you have a restaurant and you have an event room, and you can have 50 people in that room. I did not take that to be you have an enormous parking lot and you can only have 50 people in it. So I don't know if perhaps Rob, you've heard something I haven't, but I would caution us not to make plans around 50 people when in fact 200 may be very comfortable in someone's parking lot with enough space.
I think that's a very reasonable point. It's sort of like nailing Jell-O to the wall. This is not an easy thing because the 50-foot event or the 50-person event limitation isn't necessarily designed to deal with the fact that there's not enough space between 50 people because there's no space, square footage in that calculation. It's just people. And the rationale around, limiting the size of mass gatherings really is just that parking and toilets and all of the things that go with events start bumping people into one another. You may have, an event of 50 people in a huge open field and still have problems at the toilets or still have problems at the parking lot. So her point with the 50-person event isn't so much that you don't have the space for it. It's that at some point, just getting too many people together creates friction in the people mixing.
I understand that, but an event, if you're at an event, say you're at a wedding, you're going to be closer to the people in that space than you are at a restaurant setting, right? Restaurant setting, you don't know those people. The people that are around you. I think it's an entirely different perspective, an event as opposed to a restaurant setting. So I would caution us to be mindful of that an event, is such that,
I think,
the premise is you want to be with those people at that event. A restaurant is not based on that same premise.
I think you're exactly right. I think the issue for us going forward is going to be making sure that what we do is reasonable. We're going to have to be, and that's sort of, I'm trying to, when I say, there may be 2 service areas, we're trying to figure out ways to make sure that we're not bumping people into each other. We're trying to make sure that we're creating continuous distance between all of the participants throughout their experience in that venue, during that event, whatever it is. We've just got to figure out ways to be continuously distant from one another. And the 50
again, restaurant seating isn't a parade. So exactly. I think we're very much able to expand beyond 50 in a restaurant setting. And when you look at Saugatucket Park, we could take, you have enormous capacity there.
The good news is that the state is very, very aware of the fact that their benchmarks, and that's what they are, benchmarks, are not absolute hard and fast limits. They're very much aware of the fact that we're going to have to do enforcement, and we're going to have to craft rules of enforcement and sort of rules of operation for businesses that make sense locally. Your point about a large parking lot and nobody ever having any danger of bumping into each other is exactly right. I'm not trying to say, the Muse can't have more than 50 people. What I'm trying to say is the Muse can't have more people than can be safely distanced. The 50-person benchmark is a useful benchmark. It's not an absolute definitive cap. And then the real issues, and we've talked to Dave about this before, are going to be things like the potty plan and the parking plan and the, just making sure that folks don't bump into each other coming out of the restroom. Right, we have two other folks with hands up. Joe Veely. Councilman?
So thank you. So there's another municipality in our state that is in relation to the outside dining that has taken a different approach. So their approach is that any restaurant that is licensed in their town, as soon as the order from the governor is lifted on dining, immediately can do temporary outdoor dining service. And then if there are safety issues or neighbor issues, their council meets twice a month, just like ours, and would address those issues. So for instance, if someone was serving till 11 o'clock at night, I mean, you could put a limit on that. If someone had entertainment and there were residences nearby, my only point is I'd love to have this conversation Monday night, but theirs is much less restrictive. And if you have a license to operate, you will automatically be allowed to do outdoor seating. In some restaurants, it's not going to make sense. They don't have room to do it. And in other restaurants, they've got plenty of room. And the town can police it, but it sort of takes that whole permitting process off the table. If you're allowed to open your restaurant, you're allowed to have outdoor seating. And there will be issues, and we'll deal with them as they come, but it's less restrictive to the restaurants. So again, this is a discussion for the agenda on Monday night. I'm glad to have it. I just wanted to throw that out there, that there are other communities dealing with this in a less restrictive way. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have discussed other approaches to this. The only thing I'd say about our approach so far is that we think it's important to make sure that life safety issues are right up front. We've had a couple of applicants come forward. One would like to put a deck on a rooftop. We need to make sure that the railing system is appropriate, that the stairs are safe, that the fire code is met. And we've had an applicant come with a parking lot service area, and just through the course of conversation, shift where the guests will be sitting so as to avoid vehicle pedestrian conflicts. The conversations can be useful. We do think it's important to maintain life safety review. I think that we will, once we get this down, be able to approve applications because they're temporary applications administratively within 3 days of being filed. I don't think this is going to be an onerous process at all.
Rob, one other question on has there been any guidance on party size maximum for restaurants? Not that I'm anticipating any big parties, but if somebody wants to have a reservation of 20 people at the restaurant, just I don't know if there's been any discussion on that front, or unrelated parties get together.
So right now, the state rule is no more than 5 people is the limit on gatherings. We're going to be going to 10 in phase 1 and 50 in phase 2. Is that right? Anybody? 50 in phase 2, and then 100. I've heard in August is an anticipated number. So those would be the limits. I mean, it's going to be the state gathering limits. And Councilman DeCruz.
Thank you, Rob. I had a couple just comments to make. One, the idea that you and Perry were talking about in regards to having a date and then also when the actual restrictions are lifted. I think that's super important because of the investment that folks are going to have to make into trying to making this work for their businesses. The other thing, in regards to the land trust, sometimes I forget which parks are owned by land trust, but are there any other parcels of land from the land trust that could be utilized with their permission? And are they willing to do that or allow us to do that in this case? And lastly, Kayla, your idea with the Vermont concept along, the decking along the road, I think would be fantastic. My only concern with that is how to keep people safe on a pretty busy road, and especially a road that I think sometimes people drive too fast on. And that's all.
So the nice thing about the decks is they provide a very visible barrier. Folks, when you're driving down a road with one of these things or several of these things on the street, you're very aware of the fact that you are in danger yourself if you hit one of those. So I think that, they have the traffic calming impact that you'd like to see because they're highly visible. All right, any other thoughts, comments, things we ought to be thinking about that we haven't talked about and therefore don't seem to be thinking about?
So Rob, this is an agenda item for the council for Monday night, right? We've got a couple memos and some recommendations, some things that we'll put on their agenda.
Yes.
And then depending on what happens after Monday night, we'll make sure whatever gets adopted, we'll put up on our website so that the other restaurants, you've got a few others that are on today that are listening probably for the first time on this new permitting process to try to help the resident or help the businesses survive and eventually thrive, right?
Right. So the agenda will have two of the items we've talked about for Monday night. The one is this regulatory relief concept, and the other is the use of parks concept. The Recreation Commission's will report out from the Recreation Commission's meeting the other night. Carol McEntee, Representative McEntee, I saw your hand.
I just wanted to say, Rob, I'm looking up the phase 1, phase 2. It looks like phase 2 allows for social gatherings limits increased to 15 people. So maybe then you could have a reservation for 15. And then the phase 3 is when it goes to 50 social gatherings limited to 50 people. So I just want to make sure everybody was aware of that. And phase 1 is supposed to be 10, but is that what you heard, phase 1?
We're at 5 now. We'll be going to 10, and then 50
Not clear as to what day we go to 10. So
would be the 9th of May, I believe.
you think we go right then? Okay. All right, I'm just looking at the latest phase 1, phase 2.
And right now it looks like each phase is.
Oh yeah, phase 1 is 10. Sorry, I missed that one. Yep.
And then each phase about 14 days each, depending on what happens in those phases.
Right. Right.
Thanks, Carol.
All right. One last thing that I'd like to get some feedback on. Is there any equipment or any services that the restaurants are anticipating they may need that they're finding difficult to acquire because of supply chain issues? I'm thinking really about sanitation equipment, decontamination equipment. We've been going through public buildings with an ionizing decontamination machine, and I'm wondering, has everybody got the equipment they need? Is there anything out there that you'd like to have that you don't have at this point to make sure that you, your staff, and your customers are safe?
I think that ionizing machine would be something that not a lot of restaurants are going to have. If there was one that maybe a community one that we can, that we could kind of pass around and use it as recommended, whether it's weekly or twice a week or whatever the requirements are. Seems like something that might be good.
All right. We've had machines, we've had machines on order. We've been borrowing the school department's machine to make ours work. But one of the things that I recognize the town may need to do is make some purchases over the course of the next couple of months. If it's decking for parking spaces on Main Street, you know, these are things that we're aware we may have to do to support local businesses. If it's small buildings that we have to acquire for retail shops in our parks, if it's an ionizing machine that can be used for public health purposes in various businesses, we're open to those suggestions. Just keep in mind that the sooner we know that you've got a need that we're going to have to make a purchase for, we're going to have to do a contract, service contract for, the better, because we are going to have to dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that we have the financial resources to make the purchase. So if you have special equipment needs, or if you have infrastructure needs such as decks to be constructed on over parking spaces, we know that restaurants are operating with little or no revenue right now, and we recognize we may have to step up. Just let us know as soon as you can so that we can begin preparing for those purchases.
Rob, I was able to buy just on Amazon, I think there are 64 watt ultraviolet sanitation bulbs. And there's something that you set and leave when you exit the restaurant at night. They treat about a 1,100 square foot area at a time, 360 degrees. They seem very powerful because they don't want anybody or pets in the room.
Yeah, they are scary, huh? I've read the reviews. They seem to be very effective, but yeah, don't let anybody walk in the room after the thing's been turned on. It's kind of scary.
They were fairly inexpensive too, around $130 a piece.
Yeah, they may be an effective tool. It's the bathrooms that I think are going to be the thing that customers focus on more than anything else. Folks are going to be very aware of the cleanliness of restrooms over the course of the summer, I think. All right. If there are no other questions or concerns or nothing else that folks want to talk about, I think we're going to wrap this one up. Thanks again. As always, we're open to ideas, suggestions. By all means, feel free to give us a call or drop us an email. We're scrambling like everybody else, but we'll make the time to address your concerns. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.